Appreciate you being here. Of course, we're going through our readings, reading through the Bible this year. There are green sheets. There's a few up here, but they're also out in the foyer for our readings in January. If you want to get way ahead, there's electronic versions on our weekly email with the bulletin. You can look at the whole year. So we're taking a look here. It's been a few weeks since we had a class here about our readings. So let me encourage you that if you haven't started, you can just start where we are, because it's a lot of material to cover every week, but it's a lot of good things to look at as well. As we go through this class, I'm not going to view this as me teaching as much as moderating a discussion. As you're reading, we're asking you to ask the question, what is important to God? Why is this here? What do you learn? What do you see? And we're also been asking you to journal, to write and keep notes as you do that. If you filled up a book or if you're new to starting, we have some journals up here for you to write and to do that as well. So, if you don't have comments or questions or things that stood out to you, I have some questions, but I'd rather hear from you first. So let me start it this way. We followed the story from God selecting Abram in Ur, brought him to Canaan, to the Promised Land. Isaac and Jacob, and then Jacob's sons are down in Egypt, 430 years. And God brings them out, wander around in the wilderness for a while, and they have gone into the Promised Land, into the land of Canaan. So let's see if I can do this right. I was hoping that would look bigger. This is the land as it was divided by Joshua among the 12 tribes, and that's what we're looking at through the book of Joshua, through the book of Judges. We're not going to try and cover all of Joshua and Judges. We're just going to let that skip on by. But one of the things, I know some of you may have been, some of you I know have been over there to Israel, to this land. And so you've got a much better idea of it. I have never been. I've looked at this map as far back as I can remember, all my life. But I don't have a good scale of it. I mean, it's talking about a nation, and my experience of a nation is we're a pretty big place. So I got to trying to figure out, well, how far is this? How big of an area is this? I am familiar with this place. I have been here, or just south of here, all my life. So this is the official state map of Oklahoma, which I'm assuming that you're familiar with. But approximately to scale, if I lay these on top of each other to scale, it is not a big area of the world. In fact, think of it this way. The Mediterranean Sea runs from just west of Altus, through the edge of Altus, up just west of Enid and up through Cherokee. Western Oklahoma is once again underwater. The Jordan River goes from the Kansas line down to about Norman, about just a few miles east of I-35. Lawton and Altus are Philistines. If you grew up in Moore, like I did, they are Philistines. We're the stories of in the last part of Judges, and a lot of what we're talking about in the first part of Samuel is in the area of Benjamin and Ephraim, and that's the Oklahoma City metroplex. Benjamin's like Norman and Moore, fighting with Altus and Lawton. It's just not a big area. In fact, I did a little research because the more I dug into this, the more interesting it became to me. Modern Israel is not even on the east side of the Jordan. If you took the state of Oklahoma and divided it into 8 parts, the nation of Israel is one of those parts, 1/8 the size of Oklahoma. And in the state of Oklahoma, in the entire state, we have 4 million people. The nation of Israel, 1/8 the size of Oklahoma, has 9 million people. To say they're a little denser than we are, Oklahoma averages 55 people per square mile. The modern nation of Israel averages over 1,100 people per square mile. It's tight. But it just was amazing to me when I started looking at this that we're not talking about a large section of land. Now, granted, it becomes larger when you're walking everywhere or riding on an animal as opposed to doing 50 to 70 miles an hour. But it's not a big area. So I just found that interesting. All this land we're talking about would easily fit within our state. So what we've done is we've been reading through the book of the Bible. This last week, we would have finished up the book of Ruth and started in the first part of Samuel, first 19 chapters of Samuel, which is a lot of material. We learn about Samuel's family, his birth, his dedication to the Lord, that he is called by the Lord, and the Lord establishes him as a prophet in Israel. It says, as none of his words fell to the ground. Everything they came to him about came true. We have pretty constant warring between the Israelites and the Philistines. So much so that they decide the Israelites want a king, and the Lord gives them Saul, son of Kish, a Benjamite. Saul disobeys the Lord, is rejected as king, and David is anointed to be king. And then David is rising in prominence, and Saul is waning. So in your reading and story, reading in this story, and stories, because there's a lot of stories in there, including David and Goliath, what did you see? What did you learn? What is important to God? This is your part.
When they went to fight the Philistines with Saul, they were scared, and so they started running off. So how far of a cry is that from when just 6-8 weeks ago we were reading about let's go down to the water and pair all the way down to 300 people to fight these folks because we have God on our side. Like just like the drop of faith in God to deliver them it's just drastic. Given that they're now following Saul and not God.
Yeah, you're talking about where the army, Saul has called the army together. They're going to go fight Philistines. There's 10,000 or so of them or whatever. But they have to wait a week. And as they get, I've not been in battle, but as they're thinking about that, they're going, maybe not. And starts dwindling. So what happens in that story? Oh. The next number you hear is Saul, there's only 600 left, which is still twice what Gideon had. Do you think they knew the story of Gideon? Oh. Interesting. Debbie, you had something.
You said, what made you think this week? And just thinking about the fact that Ruth was a Moabitess, and the children of Israel were, told so strictly not to intermarry with the Moabites and the Ammonites. And yet she plays such a prominent role in not only, the birth of David, but then on down, the lineage of Christ. And I think it's just a really telling how God feels about people who truly turn away from their backgrounds, whatever they are, if they're not right with God, and truly devote themselves to, to living for God. And that was, she completely gave up her home and her family because she wanted to go with Naomi. And you can't help but think Naomi must have talked about her God, and even though they were in, the country of Moab, that, this wasn't, Ruth didn't start hearing about God when she hit the border of Israel. She knew about God back in Moab,
Yeah.
the one true God.
If you missed, since we're reading through this quickly, there may have been in the back of your mind reading in the end of Deuteronomy 23. Do I have that down? I didn't copy that down. Basically, it says, Moses says, no Moabite or Ammonite is to be able to join the assembly of God's people even unto the 10th generation. And yet Ruth comes into Israel, and not just comes into Israel, but winds up marrying a kinsman redeemer, a leader in the clan. How does that happen? Thoughts? Diviners, yes. In fact, it's in Judges, or the first part of Samuel, is that a seer is the old name for a prophet, that they call prophets seers, back in that. So it's not, but necromancers, diviners, yes, that is forbidden. It's an interesting discussion when you try and do some research into, even to the Jewish rabbis, thinking, okay, because this Moabitess is the great-grandmother of the awesome King David, and yet, even if it's to the 10th generation, how is it that David was allowed in the temple? Kind of puts a kink of things, doesn't it? The Jewish rabbis say, well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that curses are going through the paternal line, so that she's maternal. The other part is, like Debbie was saying, that she is a devoted follower of God, of Yahweh, of the Lord. And everybody sees that she converted. One of the interesting things to me that you see in David's kingdom when you start reading that, notice how many non-Israelites are among his closest followers. Just to give you a preview, Uriah, one of his closest 30 warriors, his personal protection detail, is a Hittite. not an Israelite. So, that is interesting. So, what? Yes. That's a different story. Read that when you get there. And I got questions about that old story, but we're not there yet. So yeah, that's really interesting. We won't learn it until Matthew, the first chapter. But do any of you realize who Boaz's mother is? Rahab, the Canaanite harlot. Interesting. And this is the king's family lineage. What else did you read this week? Yeah. Yeah, and that's her commitment to Naomi. There is no children mentioned of any of that. Naomi's children are dead. They don't have Social Security. There is nobody to take care of her when she gets old. And Naomi says, I will do that. Debbie? Yeah. Yeah, there's a commitment there. And if you're wondering, in the Old Testament, the last mention of Rahab is at the end of Joshua, and she and her family are outside the camp of Israel. The next thing you read is from Matthew chapter 1, and she is wife of the clan leader of Israel. There's a good story there somewhere. Now, speaking of Ruth, I know my vision of Ruth was always colored by the movie. I don't even know when it was made. There was a movie about the book of Ruth, about Ruth and her life and all of that. And it's kind of like a friend of mine said, he went back and saw the movie The Ten Commandments for the first time in his adult life, and he realized that all those mental images he had of the 10 plagues were from that movie. So my image is that, but as I read it as an adult and got to thinking about it, I don't think we realize what Naomi told Ruth to do and what Ruth did at the threshing floor. Okay? What kind of a woman unmarried woman goes and spends the night with a bunch of men? And what does it mean to uncover his feet and then tell him, throw the corner of your blanket over me? Think about that for a little bit and then go back and read Matthew 1. in what they were saying about Mary. So, what else did you read? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of stories there where Saul didn't do, and the rejection is, one where he didn't wait for Samuel, and yeah, Samuel tells him obedience is better than the sacrifices. And the other is, I love the phrase, what he says, yeah, we devoted all of them to destruction. He goes, then what's this cattle that I hear? What's this mooing, and what if you devoted everything to destruction, all of it's dead, why do I hear livestock? Oh, we brought that back. And then you understand, to sacrifice, but it's not just a sacrifice to the Lord, it's sacrifice to the Lord is actually a big fellowship meal for the people. But obedience is better than that. Interesting. Did he learn? Yeah, the ark is more than good luck charm. Yeah, interesting in that story. They capture it, they put it in the house of their god. The statue, the next morning, they get up the statue that apparently had been perfectly fine, standing on its own for who knows how many years, falls down in front of the ark. And they go, well, how did that happen? I don't know. So they stand it back up. The next morning, it has fallen, but now then its hands and its head are broken off. I loved when then they called the diviners, which Israelites are not supposed to do, and the diviners come and say, don't be like the Egyptians. Look what happened to them. They kept fighting this and were destroyed. Send the ark back. Now, any of you been around cows and calves in a farm situation? Some of you have. We're mostly a urban society now. So let me explain something. A cow does not leave a new calf. Okay? And when the first time you put a yoke on an animal, they do not like it. And they struggle against it and they pull against it. And I've not actually seen it, but I understand it's pretty funny when you put two new animals together on a yoke that they do not try to go the same direction at all. And they have to learn how to work together. The Philistines take 2 cows with calves who have never had a yoke on before. They pin the calves up over here and put all the ark and everything on the cart, and the cows lowing, in other words, bawling because their calves are behind them, but the cows go that way. They leave the Philistines and they go towards Israel, even though their calves are over here. And the Philistines follow and watch to see how this is going to turn out. Is this really happening? And it does, and the cows keep going until they come to an Israelite village. And the Philistines don't interfere. But imagine that you are an Israelite and you hear this and you look up and here comes cows and a cart with nobody driving it over the hill down in next to your village, and you look upon the hill and here's at least 5 Philistine leaders with their entourage on the hillside over you. A little nervous? But they don't attack, they watch, and then they leave. What a story. What else stood out to you? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That everybody wasn't cleared out and was left to be a test. And then apply that to us. Like, seems like I've heard a sermon about that somewhere. Like, there's not an easy button. What else stood out to you? Anything else? Yes. Mm-hmm. Can be. Uh-huh. Yeah. What did you learn? What do you think is going through David's mind and heart as he sees all this? Do you see the conflict there? Saul is the Lord's anointed, and David uses that phrase a lot, that my God the God of Israel, Yahweh, has anointed Saul to be king. But he's also anointed me. Yeah, and David seems to be perfectly fine with serving Saul. In fact, when he gets in a bad mood, trying to play some comforting music and calm him down. And Saul keeps trying to pin him to the wall. Yeah, what's going on with that? Debbie? No. I mean, if somebody throws a javelin at you and you dodge it and it sticks in the wall, do you not pull it out and throw it back at them? No. Interesting. Yes, Dale. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you go back to the end of Judges, it's kind of a spoiler. End of Judges, end of Genesis, it's kind of a spoiler alert, right? What does Jacob say about the scepter, the sign of ruling? Never departs from Judah. From what tribe is Saul? Benjamin. What tribe is David? Judah. Yes, Debbie. Yes. Yeah. That's at the end of Judges, towards the end of Judges. It's amazing to me how much at the end of Judges is about the tribe of Benjamin and the hill country of Ephraim. All that right there in there together. In fact, it mentions several times Ephrathites. I kept wondering, what is an Ephrathite? When you look it up, that is the old name of a city, Ephrathah, which we would know more commonly as Bethlehem. Check out Micah 5:2. And you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, are not least, because out of you will come a ruler. Ephrathites means they're from Bethlehem. Yes. Yeah. Good questions when you figure that out. I think it's a trappings of power. You know, I mean, who was the tallest man in Israel? Saul. So who's the most logical person to go out and fight Goliath? Your big guy. That's, if you're looking at it from a human standpoint. But as David said in that conflict, it's not the mighty. The battle belongs to the Lord. And apparently, but good looking. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, to me, it's funny. Saul says, I need to get him in my family. I need to get him, into my household. Marry my daughter. No, marry my daughter. And then when he does, and then Saul realizes, my daughter really loves him. Oh, this is not good. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the fact that when you go back and look at it is just kind of passing, but Moses gave commandments from God about what the king is supposed to do when you get one.
Even though, as we talked a lot about in Exodus and Deuteronomy and those books back there, the objective of all of this law and all of this behavior was so that they would be so different than everyone else that the land that they were going to enter into, that they would be recognized as God's people. And yet he did, as Darrell said, and allowed that.
Yeah.
Changed his mind.
Instead of being different, to be look the same as. Yeah. At the Philistines, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That this God of Israel apparently is really powerful. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you, I'm going to spend the last few minutes here asking you to think about David's experience and through what we've read so far as to what was going through his mind when Saul is after him. What does David do to defend himself? Run. Get out of the way. He winds up with the guy who anointed him and who anointed Saul at Samuel's home area. Did you read the part there, what Saul does when he learns that's where David is? He sends men to arrest him. Okay. He'd already sent men to David's house, and Micah covered for him and had helped him escape, and then covered it for him to get a good lead. Now then, Saul sends men to the guy who anointed him to arrest David. What happens to the men? They prophesied. Now, what does that mean? As we read through the story, apparently it means the Spirit of the Lord came on them so heavily that they're talking and prophesying, and they do that and don't do what they came to do. 3 times it happens. Now, I don't know if the Spirit of the Lord releases them and they go, I'm going back home, or if they're still there. The story's not real clear about that. I'd have to think about that and work that through if I were making a movie about it. And I also wonder if what happened to them was what happens to Saul, because after sending 3 groups, and I'm sure they got better and more loyal with each group, Saul goes himself and says, enough of this. And the Spirit of the Lord comes on Saul, and it says that he stripped all his clothes off of him and lay naked before the Lord all day and all night prophesying, so that it said, is Saul also among the prophets? Just the question and the proverb that was said when Saul, before he was anointed as king, after he'd been chosen and anointed by Samuel, but was not king yet. He was on his way home. And he ran into a group of prophets, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he prophesied. And so the proverb in Israel is Saul also among the prophets? Who is rescuing David? It's not David rescuing David. So, like you were saying before, we are not brought out of this world. We don't get an easy button, Daryl, but we get strength and perseverance if we obey and follow. Becky? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not about ourselves. It's not about me. And it's we've got to obey and yet do our part. So do what seems best, but make sure that at the same time you're also being submissive. Great conversation. I know I see some other indications, but we're a little bit past time, so I need to let you go because some of you need to go rescue teachers over in the other building. Thank you for being here. Oh, next week, by the way, where is it? We'll get into the end of 1 Samuel and pick up 2 Samuel. Thank you.